Hi friends, Jenny at Clover and Violet, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to design your own custom patchwork. We're going to be making our custom patchwork for the Katie book sleeve, and so here are a couple of samples of custom patchwork book sleeves I've made. You can see these two simple book sleeves, and in the lesson I'm going to be showing you all of the details about how you can calculate how many squares you need for your own custom patchwork. So let's head over to the cutting table and I'll show you how to get started so that you can customize not only the Katie book sleeve, but any other cute patchwork project you want to make. All right, I'll see you there. Let's make some custom patchwork. So I've drawn out 4 rectangles right now, and these are representative of the Katie book sleeve, which is what I'm going to be making with these custom patchwork projects. But you can make your custom patchwork for any project that you like. Just start out with a piece of graph paper. I like this kind of larger graph paper. It's 4 squares to 1 inch, and I use 1 inch per inch on my project. So these book sleeves I've drawn out to be 8 inches by 11 inches. So 11 squares high, 8 squares across. You can customize this to anything. I just wanted a sample to show you that would be easy, would fit on this page, and can help you get started with your custom patchwork. So we've drawn our 4 book sleeves, and this is going to help us see kind of how the sleeve is going to look if we made them 11 by 8. Now, I am not counting the seam allowance in my custom patchwork, so whenever you have 1 inch box, let me draw one up here. So here's a 1 inch box. You're going to need to cut 1 1/2 inch for your square. Likewise, say you had a 2 by 2 right here, you're going to have to cut 2 1/2 inch squares. So keep that in mind. You need to add your seam allowance to these blocks, but it's really just adding 1/2 inch to whatever size blocks you're making. So let's just start off with our first sleeve, and we're just going to make it plain 2 1/2 inch patchwork on the top. So since I know this is 8, and then we're just going to say the bottom is just going to be one basic color, and this is a 3 inch piece. So you'll want to cut here 3 1/2 inch tall and then 8 1/2 inch wide. So and then we have our squares. And so for this, we'd need 1, 2, 3, 4 times 4, 16 2 1/2 inch squares. Okay, and so then you could lay this out and you'll make this formula. This is what your book sleeve will look like. Now, you're probably thinking that's pretty simple, and I wanted to show you this really basic idea first before we started getting into slightly more complicated patchwork. So now let's say we have this 6 inch block right here. So this is a 6 inch foundation paper pieced block, and we want to put this on our book sleeve. And then let's say we want to do this one just the same. So let's do our 3 inch bottom piece. And then our block is 6 inches. It's actually 6 1/2 because of the seam allowance. And so it's going to fit right here because we had 8 by 8. So this is an 8 by 8 square. And then we know that our block is only 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See, 6 by 3, 6. And so what you know is that you're going to need to add a 1 inch border to each side. I always like my borders to be the top being the long ones. And so then now we have, you're going to need 2 6 1/2 inch by 1.5 inch for these edges, and then these are going to be 8, so you'll need 2 8.5, so whatever your number was, we're just going to add half by, not plus, by 1.5 inch. And so that's going to fit your cute little 6-inch block right here. We have a border, we have the bottom, and then the bottom is again going to be this 3.5 by 8.5 piece. That'll make this whole block. Now let's get a little experimental. Say you want to do 3-inch squares. So we know that this is 8, so it's not going to get the full 3-inch squares. And here's where I do my patchwork a little differently. Is what I would do is I would still put my 3-inch squares, and then here's going to be our extra edge, and then I would make my whole piece now 9 inches wide. And so let's just do this. And then let's just say we want to have a 2-inch piece of a solid fabric across the top. So what I would do when doing something like this is I would just add that extra inch. Instead of trying to make the math work to shrink this down, I would add that extra inch. So then we're going to have 9 3.5-inch squares for this portion, and then 1 2.5 by 9.5. And so I would make this whole thing, and it's going to be too wide for my sleeve. And then what I'm going to do is, after I've made it, I'm going to trim it so that it's the correct size. So it's going to be 9.5, and I'm going to take off a 1/2 inch on this side, and then a 1/2 inch on this side. And so even though these sides are now going to be a little short and this middle is going to be longer, I tend generally not to notice that. Now, if you're making a project where it's really imperative that all the squares be exactly the same size, then you'd want to use maybe some more complicated math to make these. But honestly, this is what I would do, is I would just trim this and then erase. So now your sleeve is 8.5 by 11, and these are a little bit shorter. And I've made other projects like this. I made the Alice backpack out of little squares once, and I just made the pattern to the size, but a little bit bigger with the squares, and then just trimmed it centered to the appropriate size. And you can't really notice that these sides are cut off. So especially since we're probably making custom patchwork in this lesson for something like a book sleeve or a backpack or a sewing case, something like that. And so you don't have to worry about the patchwork exactly fitting your project. In fact, if it's a little cut off on the side, it's really okay. Let me show you a sample of this. So this is a cute little rice bag that my mom made for me. And so she made the panel, the patchwork panel, and these little hearts were too big. And so she really just cut them off. Right here, you can see this has a small point. It should be this much bigger. This is just cut off. And honestly, it is so cute that way, if you ask me. Like, what an adorable, unique look. She could have tried to finagle it to be the exact width, but instead, it just has this really charming, almost like a cutter quilt style. So don't be constricted by the dimensions of your project to make your custom patchwork. So while these are great, this works out so evenly. Even this one with the trimming is just fine. And you can see on this bag I was showing you, it's not even centered. It's a little off to the side, and that's totally cute too. So don't be limited by your finished size for your custom patchwork. So here's an idea with squares. Here's how we can modify that with larger squares. You could, of course, do 1-inch squares. Here's a large thing. Let's just imagine also that we're going to do a couple of 4-inch pieces. So we know that this is 8. and we'll just put this here. And so you could make this with your additional 4-inch pieces, right? And then use 4-inch heart blocks or whatever you want. Let's imagine that we're going to do really simple hearts. So here's our cute little heart blocks, and again we have this extra inch. You could make your sleeve 1 inch taller. You could remove the inch in the end from the bottom, or we could do like we did in the previous one, go for a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch there. But don't be hesitant to trim your blocks after you make them. So whatever the nearest whole measurement size is, then you can trim your blocks down and make it fit. So hearts, stars, other simple small blocks would be so cute. You could do just maybe 3 of these, or you could do 2 and then do some 2-inch patchwork. There's so many options that you can mix and match these ideas together. I just wanted to give you an idea of how I start putting custom patchwork together. The other thing I wanted to talk about is custom patchwork on the diagonal. So these are obviously all squares, and I really love to draw them on graph paper because unless you're making something very large, and I've made a whole quilt row on graph paper because there's about 42 inches, 42 squares, which make 42 inches on this particular 4x4 graph paper. Let's also talk about creating patchwork, custom patchwork on the diagonal. So we've already discussed that these blocks are 1 inch for 4 of them. So if I measure this up, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 is 1 inch. And so we're going to imagine that these blocks again are inches, but this time I'm going to draw my book sleeve. I'm going to draw 12 by 9 this time, just because that's going to work out easier whole inches. So we know that 4 blocks is 1 inch. And I'm just going to line my sleeve up on the diagonal. And so 12 blocks is going to be 3, would be equivalent to 3 inches. And so if you line it up on the points, and then draw. So here's 3 inches. And then the next measurement was going to be 2 inches, 2 inches, which would be the equivalent of 8 squares. And then we'll do the same down this row. And then again here at the top. You can't really see through my ruler, but here we have a 2 by 6, which would be the same as 12 squares high and 4 squares across. So these were 11 high by 8, but this would be 12. But we also know that each of these is 1/4 of an inch, and which is what I love about these 4 squares to 1 inch. So I could draw this 1/4 inch and then kind of remove this here. And now I have an idea of what this looks like for a 1 by 1 diagonal grid. And of course, this is cutting off some points. Let's turn it this way, since this corner is perfect. And this is cutting off some points. So like these little points here, you would have, and again, this is especially perfect for the kind of pattern where you can slightly adjust the size. So for example, on the book sleeve, if your patchwork piece is just 1/4 inch smaller, you can still make your book sleeve 1/4 inch smaller. And so this is going to tell you how many 1 inch squares. But let's imagine that our squares are 2 inches, which would mean we're cutting 2.5 inch squares. But you can draw these out just like this, and this will give you an idea of how many you're going to need to make this project and how many rows of diagonal patchwork you're going to need to lay out. Like see, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're actually going to need a 5th right here. And then this is going to make it, but you're also going to need a corner piece, which I would probably just add on like so. Then we'll come over here and you're going to need another piece here to make sure we get that corner. And we're going to need another piece on top to make sure we get this corner and this one here. And so this is where I always run into trouble with diagonal piecing, is I think I have enough pieces and then there's all these little spots that are missing pieces. And then here again, I would probably just sew something on the edge. And so there we have our diagonally pieced, and you can count up these squares to know exactly how many. Oh, we need one here. See, I always miss them. You can count up these squares to see exactly how many we would need with the diagonal piecing, right, like this. And then you can also measure, like when we look at this one is our middle. And so you can check to see if that's the actual middle of your project. Again, since we're using even inches here, I'm just going to draw a line at our middle. And so this is actually the middle of our project, which is a little bit off to the side. And so what you can do is look to see if you can adjust your patchwork. We can probably slide this over a little bit and add another corner right here. Just imagine if we could lift that up and slide it this way, and it would perfectly center our patchwork. And so that's how I figure out the diagonal patchwork. Of course, just like we did for our other book sleeves, we could also measure up 3 inches. Can you tell 3 inches is the size that I really love for my bottom? And then let's color this in. And let's say we use a piece of linen or some other cute solid for this. So now we don't need as many squares, but you'll still see the need for this one here, and of course these top squares. And so you can count them up and see how many you need. And you can do this formula for any diagonal patchwork, especially if you know about the number of squares that makes an inch. It will really help you to lay it out and then know how big and how many of these diagonal squares you'll need. So that's really all that we've got here for creating custom patchwork. I am going to show just a couple of samples so you can see how you can start laying out some projects using custom patchwork. So I already showed you this rice bag that my mom made me, but let me just show you the remaining sides. So here's the heart custom patchwork, and then here's a star, and you can see again that a couple of the points got cut off to make the star fit on this bag, but it's really just so cute. And then here's a side with squares, and then this little log cabin on this side. So there's that project with a lot of custom patchwork that turned out so cute. And then here is a book sleeve that I made with this heart block. This is a 9-inch block, and so then I just added a couple of inches on the bottom, an inch on the top to center my block so that it wouldn't be at the very top of the sleeve, and that turned out so fun and cute. And then here is a little house with little windows, foundation paper pieced block. You can see I added a piece of linen to the bottom and then a large piece on the top to make the full size, and it's just plain on the back. But that is how I made this block fit. I added a border to the side, and it just turned out really cute and was really easy to make. So you can do custom patchwork just like this with any of your projects, and they turn out so cute and unique once you understand this simple methodology of drawing out your blocks and then creating something custom with them, adding borders, trimming blocks, doing whatever is necessary to adjust the blocks to the size you need, and not worrying so much about trimming off a little bit of your block here or there. It still turns out so cute, and it's really a perfect way to use maybe those orphan blocks or something that you've made that didn't have a home. Maybe you thought that foundation paper piecing pattern was so cute. Now you can use it in a book sleeve or some other custom project. Thanks for watching this Creating Custom Patchwork video. If you enjoyed this content, I would love for you to like and subscribe to my channel. I'm always trying to create new and exciting projects for you. Leave a response in the comments if you're going to make custom patchwork and how it works out for you. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.